Everyone agrees HR is broken. What they can't agree on is whose fault it actually is. Today, I'm talking with Elizabeth Stephenson, a four-time CEO who has led people strategy across some of the world's most complex organizations and has zero interest in sugarcoating what's actually going wrong inside most companies. This conversation is going to change how you think about HR, leadership, and who's really responsible when workplace culture falls apart. Whether you're inside HR trying to prove your value, a leader who's been avoiding the hard conversations, or an employee wondering why nothing seems to change, this one's for you. Let's get into it. I am your host, Amy Hanlon-Rodemick, or just Amy HR. I am so excited today. We are going to be talking about HR's value proposition, or lack thereof currently. And joining me is my dear, dear friend, Elizabeth Stephenson, who is an absolute dynamo, former president of FIJI Water, president of the wonderful company, chief strategy officer of AlixPartners, bestselling author. I mean, she's just a dynamo and is now currently the CEO of Systm Foods. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm glad to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Elizabeth, you and I, we've been talking about HR off and on for years just because of our friendship, and we're both in business and everything. And I know you had some interesting experiences with HR. One of the things that we learned when we were writing this book was we got a lot of feedback from CEOs like yourself and other executives. And one of the things that we heard is HR does not have a clear value proposition. Like, what are you really here to deliver to me as the CEO, the company, the people, all of that? And certainly, if you go on LinkedIn, every day there's somebody posting some new model for HR, and none of it is really resonating, it seems, with a lot of our executives. What do you think? What's been your experience?
Well, first of all, as you know, I've run effectively 4 companies in kind of CEO roles and been involved in helping companies think about it for how to run for most of my career, right? I was in consulting before this, spent a lot of time with CEOs helping them think about what they need. And I would say actually HR is fundamental and critical. And I do think it has a value proposition. I think it's not always well articulated in companies what that value proposition is. And I think the role of HR changes and evolves over a set of things, right? So what's the role of HR depends on, I think, probably 3 strategic levers, right? So what size company you are, right? Are you small? Are you mid-sized? Are you really large? I think it evolves based on the evolution of the company, right? Where are you in terms of your evolution, right? Are you in the startup phase? Are you in a growth phase? Are you maturity? Are you in distress? I've worked a lot with distress companies. That's a whole different thing. HR is really critical there. And then I think that there's also just where's the evolution of the HR function, right? So I think in most companies, right, there's the ideal of where HR should be, and very often HR is not there, right? And that's not necessarily HR group's fault. It's actually management more broadly's fault, right? But you have to understand where your starting point is from where HR begins, right? And I think meet them there. But I think can't imagine, even as it's very easy to badmouth HR, but the reality is that we rely on HR every single day. In fact, it's the most critical thing, right? I mean, that's how people get paid, right? That's how we get people onboarded, right? All of those things, right? So I think it's very easy to sort of see it as sort of the kind of poster child that you criticize, but really, if you're criticizing it, it's like, I think it's actually a reflection on management.
Bless you for saying that. You know, as somebody who's been sitting in the chair for 30 years, it's like, you know, you get hit with all these bullets and swords, and you're like, oh man, I wish somebody, you know, in management would see or you know, jump in or help us navigate this and move in the right direction. So thank you for saying that. And I completely agree with you. It really depends on what's going on. I've done the startup thing. I've done huge companies. I've done somewhere in the middle. And I've also done distressed companies as well. And they're all interesting, and they stretch different muscles, right? In terms of skill set, depending on what you're going through. Generally speaking, what do you think the greatest value that HR brings to the table is?
Again, this kind of goes back to where you are. I think the best HR leaders I've had have been really thought partners with me. Right. So I think that, and look, HR, if you're a CEO, you need really 5 or 6 functions at the table, kind of depending on your size, right? You need to have your CFO, you need to have, your financial systems, effectively the circulatory system of the company, right? And you need to make sure the pulse is beating, and you need to have that. So that's the CFO's role, right? You need to have, your revenue line taken care of, right? Which is your sales team and your marketing team. You need to have your operations, which is your COO. And I think the next one you really need is to make all of this is the people who do the work, right? And that's your HR partner. And I think that in the best situations, that person is absolutely fundamental, and they're fundamental also depending on where you are, right? I've run effectively 4 different companies, and I've had to replace the HRIS payroll system 3 times, right? So that's something that's like very, very fundamental. And then there are other times, right, where you're able to do the stuff that feels more fun and strategic than, sort of doing a systems implementation. But I think those are all components of where you want to make sure that partner is the right one. I do think very often in companies, particularly, and I used to see this in my consulting days, is the CEO is not thinking about the people challenge. They often can put somebody into the HR role who they don't think of as a partner, right? It just becomes a placeholder. And I think that's a mistake that reflects badly on the CEO, right? It reflects badly on management, right? If you're not really sort of seeing that person as somebody who can help you problem solve through your people challenges.
Yeah, fair enough. And one of the interesting pieces of feedback that we got is that we spend too much of our focus on either the administrivia, right? Policy, performance reviews, all that stuff, or we're spending too much time on discipline and, trying to play the corporate police. It's a difficult position that we find ourselves in, being the corporate police, but also expected to be the employee advocate. And so one of the things that I was advocating for in the book is, let's start to think about how we might be able to restructure this in a way that makes more sense. Like if we're the corporate police, well, that's a legal function, right? Shouldn't that belong in legal? Shouldn't we be having like the disciplinary issues, the investigations, that sort of thing, move to legal where it belongs more appropriately? And then HR is here to take care of the human beings in the organization. But one of the things that we heard loud and clear from a lot of executives is we asked them, what is the purpose of HR? And many of them said, to protect the company. What do you think about that?
So I think this isn't clear cut. And I also think it depends on the size of the company. I think you could think more easily about separating that function for super large companies.
Yeah.
Right. Where
not so much for smaller.
Yeah. So I think anything below a couple $2 billion, I think that's not really, I don't think it's viable from a cost perspective, right? Your legal function isn't built out. Often you don't even have a general counsel. Most of that is sitting outside. I do think that it is a balance, and I've had it multiple ways, right? Where I've had HR be too much on the side of every employee complaint gets raised to the level of an emergency, where, situations are way too employee friendly, right? I've had situations where I've come in and it's been the opposite. I do think that there is kind of a balance. I don't think anybody wants to say HR should only be the function of taking care of the employees, because I think that can go really sideways pretty fast. And then you end up having a situation which is not in the interest of anyone, right? And so I think I would be careful about moving too far that way. But at the same time, I do think that a good HR person manages both well. And I would say I've spent a lot of time, and I don't think this actually gets talked a lot about certainly in my consulting days. Nobody really thought about the role of HR as the interface with the front line. And so I've been in manufacturing for a long time. Most of my companies have had big manufacturing components. But similarly, if you're in retail, you have a lot of store employees, or you're in, restaurants or food service, you have a lot of frontline employees. I think you need somebody who can moderate between those folks on an everyday basis, right? So if you have several hundred factory employees, every single day you have people who are going to need somebody who can make smart judgments about how to navigate, right? They're going to need a doctor's appointment. Somebody's going to be sick. Somebody's going on maternity leave. And they need somebody who feels, and that's not necessarily your senior HR leader, but you need somebody who can be smart, thoughtful, and collaborative on that. And you need to have policies which are very clear about when the police come down. Right. And it should be, okay, you get to be late 3 times, or you get to be these sets of things unless and it's not unreasonable, right? Unless you do these things, right? But I think you do have to have some sort of place where it's not me, the HR person who's being the police. It's right. We have a system and these are the rules of the system. Right. And not that they are inflexible. Obviously, if you're driving to work and you get in a car accident, nobody's going to not say, hey, that's okay that you were late. Are you, and more importantly, are you okay? And what do you need from the company? I think also a huge role that nobody talks about of that frontline HR person is safety, right? Things like that, right? I have run facilities where we've got forklifts and huge pieces of machinery and people can get killed. And so that function is really, really important. I say this in every single talk I ever give, every town hall I give. Our first and most important job is safety, right? It's not making money. It's not doing anything. The first thing we do every day is safety. We make sure everybody goes home safe. And I think if you look at companies who are in heavy equipment, oil and gas, energy, that's very often the thing that's the first and foremost for HR. Right. It's like, hey, have we actually managed this? And it's really important. Right. And so I think that some of those things you want the nuance. I don't think the role of HR should just be the police. But at the same time, I think it is a very tricky balance. And by the way, the CO and management needs to be engaged there. I think another mistake people make, this is a very important one, is that you say people issues are HR's responsibility. If you're a manager, your people are your responsibility, right? Yes. You are the first stop in human resources is, are you showing up as a good manager? Are you managing people correctly? Are the rules really clear? And HR is only there in those, quote, legal situations to do stuff that you've already made decisions and you've communicated, right? It shouldn't be, oh, this goes over to HR and I don't have anything to do with it, right? No, you have to have the uncomfortable conversation. You have to have the tough conversation, and that should not be delegated out.
And it's amazing. I've heard this so many times. I worked with a CPO many years ago who said, look, we're not going to surrogate manage for people because that is a very common thing where HR ends up managing for the managers because they don't want to have those difficult conversations. In fact, I worked with a CEO who would not fire anybody. I had to do the firing. It was not a good experience for the people because they're like, why isn't this person here giving me this news themselves? So I work directly for them. Who are you, HR lady? Right?
Exactly. So,
yeah. I totally agree with you.
I think conflict avoidance is probably, one of our most human characteristics. I think nobody likes conflict. I don't like conflict, but the reality is that to be a good executive, to be a good leader, you need to step in and own the conflict. And a lot of times those situations won't be conflicted at all. It's very interesting. I spent a lot of time working in consulting, and with the consulting firm I worked for, basically had an up or out policy. So people were getting let go all the time. Super high performers were getting let go all the time. And I used to say, like, the best time to work there was after they told you that they were going to let you go. They'd roll out the red carpet, make sure that you got to meet whoever, that the network was open. But I think actually having been in that environment, at least for me, when I think about those situations, right? So I tell my teams, right, first and foremost, I'm here for you as a human being. So you may get that phone call from the headhunter that's for that life-changing experience, that life-changing job, and I may not be able to match it, right? You may get a 50% pay increase or a title shift or something that's really going to be important for you. And I tell all my direct reports and even people below my direct reports is, if you get that, talk to me. Talk to me early. I will support you. If it's the right thing for you, I will be your reference. Right? My heart may break that I'm going to lose you from my team, but that's the best thing for you. And so let's make sure you do it right, but don't do it in the dark cloak of the night because you might make a mistake, right? You might not negotiate the best package for you. It may not actually be as good a job as you think it is, right? So have somebody who can be a sounding board. And that's something that I learned from people when I was in consulting, right? And it's amazing to have that. And I think being able to support people in that way is really fundamental to being a really good leader, is to say, I care about you first. I care about your family first. I care about, if you could make 50% more money, that's amazing. So I think you've got to be there on that side. And then when things aren't working, I think you need to show up and have the conversation like, why isn't this working? It can't be also something for the most part that you drop on people out of the blue. Sometimes for legal reasons, you have to drop it on somebody out of the blue, particularly like in a layoff situation or something like that. But I think, right, being able to say, hey, this is a conversation we've had for the last 4 months and nothing's changed. So there's no surprises. I think that's something that is important, right? Like these are the things that are not working, and giving people the heads up, like, okay, maybe you should start thinking about what's next, right? But I do think people get afraid of the hard conversation, and you have to have them.
You do, and it's absolutely true. And I think the most effective managers that I've worked with, they come to HR in advance of some of these conversations and say, can I maybe role play this with you, or can I show you my script of how I'm intending to go in, and what do you think, and kind of getting that feedback. But I own the conversation. I know that I'm going in, but I also recognize that maybe my approach could use a little softening here or there, a little polish, and that's where maybe HR could jump in as a thought partner in those cases. Let me ask you this question, and I'm like on the AI train big time.
Yeah.
I noticed that, I saw in our survey, and then we were interviewing CEOs and whatnot for this book, a lot of them were saying, well, do we even need HR? Like, can it be completely replaced by AI? Good.
No.
Thank you for that.
I think that there are things, I think that with any technological disruption, there's this panic that they're not going to be jobs, right? And if you go back in history since the Industrial Revolution, that's always been true. There's been a panic, and there have always been new industries and new jobs that get created. And it may not be one-to-one, and there will be displacement. And I think the world we live in is one where you, as a person trying to build a career, you have to learn to lean into the change, and you have to learn how to be flexible, and you have to recognize the job I have today may not be the job I have tomorrow. In our company, we're encouraging all of our people to learn, or certainly of a certain management level, learn how to use AI tools, how to start using AI agents, and we're in that early stages, I think, of that process. As I think most companies are, I think very few companies could say they're in the advanced stages, right? Because we're still early in the game of the whole thing. I do think that there are many ways in which you're going to need that people component, right? And you're going to need the judgment of people. AI will become a helpful tool. It can do things like monitor job. Recruiting is going to be like a perfect example, right? It's going to monitor job postings. It can read resumes. It can potentially help sift through things. But at the end of the day, somebody is going to make a decision to join your company because they feel that there were people on the other side who looked them in the eye, who shook their hand, who made them feel like, okay, this is a place I can grow and build my career, that I trust these people. And that doesn't happen with an AI robot. And so I think the role of HR will shift. Hopefully some of the things where we spend time on task-oriented things, some of that stuff can go away. I think there's a lot of things that could be automated. I have shift employees, right? It's compliant, right? That they check in at a certain time and they check out at a certain time, and then we pay them for every minute between those things. And if they forget to check in, it's a huge pain, right? But you could automate some of that stuff that says, hey, it's 8:02. You were supposed to check in at 8. Did you forget something, right? You can put it back, some of those things, as opposed to like somebody figuring out like, oh, okay, 2 hours later, Bobby forgot to clock in, right? I think those are things that can be automated, but I think a lot of the core pieces of how do you manage talent, you can't remotely think that certainly any time that a machine's going to do that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree. And this is why I started Big Bands, because I was like, we can absolutely automate a lot of the work that's done by the first, say, 1, 2, maybe even 3 layers of HR positions. A lot of the administrivia, a lot of task automation, like you say, even day-to-day employee inquiries. And again, it depends on the size of your organization, of course.
Yeah.
But one of the big challenges that I think a lot of companies are facing is, how far do we go? Right? We don't want to cut too much. One company just cut HR completely, and I have a feeling that's going to blow up in their little faces over there. We'll see. But I do believe that we are, as HR people, we're going to have to really double down on 2 key skills. One is our business acumen, which that was another piece of feedback that we got that we're not that strong in. And 2 is understanding of human psychology. What motivates people, what drives people. One of the things that is disturbing to me is that there are a lot of companies out there that aren't really necessarily acknowledging the fact that the entire world right now is under extreme stress. And what that means is it distracts people from their day-to-day work because they're worried about the economy, or maybe there's a war in their home country, or whatever the case may be. People are under a lot of pressure right now. And we need to really be able to deploy mechanisms to help try and combat that, to help people stabilize and bring balance, right, and get back to work, but at the same time, make sure that we're continuing to move forward as an organization.
Yeah.
It's an interesting time to be in, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I would come back to your question about business acumen. One of the most exceptional HR leaders I've ever worked with spent the first part of his career, he had a CPA, he spent his first part of his career in financial accounting, and then he switched over to HR. And what was really interesting is that he was not afraid of the numbers, and he really knew how to do that. And that was an enormous help. And I think it had a lot of credibility. And I think sometimes people are like, well, I'm not very good at math, so I'm going to go into HR. And I think that's probably that's not a good thing, right? Like we need to be able to leverage numbers. We need to be able to think about our biggest cost center in almost every company is our people, right? And so understanding are we optimizing that massive, massive amount of expense in a way that's in this right way? So I think that business acumen and being able to show up is important. And that's partially, I think in large companies in particular, you see this, there's a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy where it's like, John's a B or a C player, but he's a nice guy. So where do we put him? We put him in HR. And then you've pushed all these B and C players into the HR function. And then you're like, well, I don't need HR and it's not any good. And it's as opposed to actually, I need to have the uncomfortable conversation with John and let him go. Right. And I need to go find an HR leader that was really talented who could come in and make the function stronger. So I think you've got to be very, very careful about that. And by the way, that person's not going to have the psychological, neither the business acumen nor the psychological interface that you need. I think that having that person with a really advanced EQ, I think spending time on what are the components of talent development and making sure that there are programs that don't just sound nice, but actually do change things, right? Because I think that other place HR has gotten a bad reputation is, hey, there's this problem and we're going to have a new program that ends up being kind of fluffy, right, on the top of it. And so I don't know that those programs have all worked, right? And then somebody's like, well, we spent all this money and we brought in these people and we brought in whatever, and it didn't make any difference in the quality of our workforce, in the effectiveness of our workforce. And those things tend to get brought in when the economy is flush. And the reality is, if you look at the economy today, all of the growth that's happening in the public markets and the stock markets is all AI related. So anyone that's not specifically an AI company is actually in a borderline recession position. right? So all of the mainstream, Main Street kind of companies, retail, food, grocery, auto, are all facing massive, massive hits, right? Interest rates are really high, so we can't borrow to build plants, we can't invest in equipment, we can't invest in stores, whatever those things are, right, that require capital investment. Super expensive, right? So my last company, not this one, our loans, we were paying 25% interest, right? Like I mean, that's more than a credit card. And the typical rate right now for, middle market lending is 15%, right? That's incredibly expensive. So think about how expensive it is to have a 6% interest rate to buy a home. Right.
Yeah.
Imagine being at 15, right? Like that's what any company that doesn't have some unique access to the capital markets is paying for debt right now. So I think that's a really big stress, right? Any company that is dependent on imports in this tariff environment, that's a huge stress, right? We divested in portion because of this, right? A coffee company. We made a wonderful coffee, right? And you're like, okay, the tariff situation on coffee, it wasn't the only reason, but that's an uncertainty. There is no coffee that's grown in the United States. There's a little bit in Hawaii, right? But it's not at industrial scale, so you can't really base on that, right? So I think there's a lot of things that, 8-10 years ago, companies may have invested in saying, oh, okay, we can do this for HR. I think a lot of those companies are saying, I can't afford to have those investments anymore, right? I'm just trying to be able to pay my employees and make sure that we can keep going. And I think that's something that isn't necessarily being recognized because at the top, there's this AI bubble that's very exciting. It's very new. It's very interesting, but it's actually sitting up on top of all these things and making people think everything's okay when maybe down in here, it's not okay.
It's not okay. Yeah. Well, you bring up a really interesting point also about the exceptional HR person that you worked with having a finance background. It's so interesting. I've been looking at rotational programs for a long time, and it can be problematic at the C-suite level. If you take like a head of sales and put them in charge of HR, put a head of HR in charge of sales. I have zero sales experience. I will mess that thing up in 5 seconds flat. But maybe deeper in the organization, when you identify that really fast rising star population, I think that's a good time to start to rotate people around to build out those skills. Because I think about it, 100% of my career has been in HR, right? And so when I made it to the executive suite, I was very, very ill prepared. I hadn't built out those business skills on how to run a business unit, how to manage a P&L, how to understand what the numbers were saying, what all these crazy ratios are, right? And so it was a big culture shock, and I had to learn quickly. And it's still maybe a thing that makes me feel insecure at times, especially now that I'm a CEO. It's like, oh my gosh, I need to know all these numbers. It's like, no, you need to hire a good CFO. Right? Somebody that knows it, but you need to have enough of that acumen to be able to pick up when something's not right. Right? If somebody's doing something untoward.
I think you sort of take it from two angles. I do think large companies have the freedom and the opportunity to rotate people, probably not at the, EVP level, but at the manager director level. I think they do. I think they also have the opportunity to ensure that people are getting continuing education and sort of understanding what some of those components of continuing education are. And so I think, that's something that they have budgets, they have sets of things for, right? I think you can do a secondment for a while, right? Or even just send somebody along, go ride with the sales team. Go spend 4 weeks with the sales team, go to the sales conference, go meet a customer, ride along for the customer, right? I think those are the kinds of things that large companies have the capacity to do as they think about how do they build their talent, and knowing that people are going to need skills up here that they maybe don't need down here. Not very many companies have that kind of foresight. And I think you have to be both. I think you need to be large. If you go back to that matrix we talked about, you need to be large, you need to be mature, and you need to be financially healthy to be able to invest in that. And that's a moderate subset of companies. I think that if you're an individual and you say, I started my career in HR, I've been doing HR, you can take classes, right? So maybe your company won't pay for it. I mean, you can take a finance class on Coursera.
Oh, yeah.
You can you can learn these sets of things. AI actually helps you do it, right? Because you can say, okay, give me a 6-month program and teach me what are the things I need to start learning. How do I need to start learning it? What do I need to do for my 30 minutes today? I think those are things that many of us choose not to do. But if you sort of say, hey, I'm aiming a step higher, those are things I think you would do and you would invest in.
Absolutely. And then and AI is so helpful for that. You're right. I used it to build out my business plan and my early financial models. And it was so great because then it would ask you different questions and help you think through, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And would you like
Yeah.
me to put together a 3-year plan, a 1-year plan? What would you like to do? So I do
Yeah.
think AI has a lot of promise in making our lives easier and better.
Yeah.
So, Elizabeth, you're always one of my inspirations, my friend. But I decided to take the plunge about a year ago and start my own company. So, I started this AI company called Big Band AI as a response to being at Nokia and asking all the big firms, including, Alex and Deloitte and KPMG and Accenture and all of them. I said, can you help me think about my long-term digital roadmap? How should I be thinking about AI? How should I be thinking about the metaverse? Because back then the metaverse was still the buzz. And can you help me think about the whole ecosystem and put together this plan? And the best I got was, you should try Microsoft Copilot. It's like, are you kidding me? Come on. You got to have more than that. But at
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
point,
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
still
It's
new.
gotta be.
I mean, obviously, it's still new. So I decided, you know what? I know what the holes are. I know that I've got the case studies right now that I could put through the tool. So I just decided to start my own thing. We're about ready to launch our first product here. We're getting ready for beta testing. Beta testing should go live in July. But one of the things that I was thinking about as I was building this out is it's not enough just to say, here you go, here's an AI tool, go play with it and have fun. Because a lot of HR teams maybe not be familiar, they might be a little nervous about AI, and they're not sure what this means for their organization. So we actually built out a business plan where we've got 3 product lines, and you can buy them as a bundle, you can buy them a la carte, where we've got the consulting piece where, someone like myself, Dr. HR, will come on in and we'll do an assessment and a diagnosis of your organization and say, well, this is your current model. These are the inefficiencies that you have. If you deploy AI, for example, over here, this is the result that it can bring to you. And it could allow you to cut, say, 5 heads. But what if you have a rock star in that group of 5 heads that you want to hold on to, but they're not ready for that next step? That brings me to product line number 3, which is the HR Academy that we're building out to help people build those business acumen skills and the psychology skills to come up here so they could come in as an HR business partner, for example, or something a little bit higher level. But it's not enough just to say, here's a product. And as I've been having these conversations with people, the thing that's really interesting is more and more HR is being called on to co-own AI implementation with IT because you need the technical piece and you need the change management piece because people are scared of AI right now. So anyways, it's exciting time. I'm definitely going to be calling on
Very
you, my friend.
exciting.
Like, how do I raise capital?
Yeah,
But
no, 100%. I mean, it'll be very interesting to see how AI shifts across all segments, right? I mean, I think HR is one, right? We're looking at it across all parts of our business. Logistics is an amazing one for us. But I think that, as, finance, right? I mean, all of a sudden, things that were just super painful to do in finance, you can now do with AI. So I think that there's going to be a lot of places, and I think some of these more specialist functions are going to matter. I think it can't just be the Wild West where everybody's kind of coming up with their own AI tools. And I think that we'll start to see, hey, knowledge and insight in those matters and experience matters, and that's worth paying for. Right. And so I think that's the place that I think companies are going to have to make some decisions like, okay, this is worth the investment to me versus what's the payoff I'm going to get for it. And I think probably core IT platforms, particularly on the people management side. I mean, I think you've lived this, I've lived this. HR information systems, HRIS systems are all super painful. They've all, there've been, so many, there's the old guard that's tried to do it. I think there's been a lot of new startups that have tried to do it. I think all of them, as I said, I've done, 3 implementations in 4 companies, and I think they're all just very, very, very kludgy. And so it'll be interesting to see how that stuff starts to change too, right? Is it an AI that sits on top that makes it smoother? Is it kind of a start from scratch model on these things that should be relatively straightforward? Payroll should be pretty straightforward, and it's unfortunately not, right? And there's obviously a lot of regulatory and compliance and things you have to get right there, but you're like, why is this so hard? It shouldn't be so hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, okay, I've got a few hundred, I've got a few thousand employees. You ought to be able to have that. It's not like a massive data set, right? It's a pretty constrained number. And so I think those are things that it'll be really interesting to see how that evolves, but it's exciting.
Mm-hmm. It is exciting. It's pretty crazy. I think back over the last 30 years I've gone through, let's see, we had the internet became a thing, then you had the cell phone technology became a thing, and now we've got AI. It's like, I feel like we've lived 1,000 lives in the last 30 years.
I would say there's something around something we sort of touched on, right? Which is the role of HR when businesses are just in stress. And a lot of businesses have periods of stress. When we think about a lot of the stereotypes of HR happen when we think about big companies, large bureaucracies, large sets of no, you can't, right? And I think that's a really small subset of companies. 50% of the workforce works in small and medium-sized businesses. And so less than 500 employees. And most companies bigger than that have a couple thousand employees or relatively small numbers. And so the idea of some of these things that feel like the bells and whistles, I think the questions like, is HR showing up when stuff's hard, right? You absolutely need to be. And oftentimes you're making decisions you don't want to make. And it's a little bit like, okay, to keep the company alive, we can't have 20% of these employees, right? Because we will not pay our bills, right? So it's a question of do we have 0 employees and we shut the doors? Or do we have to make some of those hard decisions? Do we have to make some of those changes? And I think that's something that most companies are pretty ill prepared to do. And I think having a really strong HR person who can be not there just when times are good, but can actually be a meaningful partner when times are hard is actually the most important thing. And I think that's really one of the places I've been super grateful for my HR partner, because you have so many things in those situations. You have a whole set of compliance issues. There's a whole set of people management issues, right? There's a whole set of things that are hard conversations that break, nobody wants to do it, right? They break everybody's heart. And so I think being able to have that piece, I think, is something that's really, really important when we think about HR. And I think it's very often in the place of being fat and happy where it's easy to criticize, as opposed to wow, we're actually in a place where my specialty is I often come in and work with middle market companies, often private equity owned companies that have grown to this place and they need to get to this place, and they're over their skis. And so there's a lot of hard stuff that happens between here and here. And I think having an HR partner in that place you absolutely need that person. And you need that team.
Agreed. You need somebody that can step up in wartime and keep the inspiration going when things are fat and happy, as you say.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, as always, Elizabeth, it is a delight talking to you. And before we end, we always end with one of the stories from the book that talks about somehow how HR went bad. And this one is on the chapter about our value proposition. So let me just read this.
Okay.
All right. I've been an exec at several large companies, and I'm super disappointed to see that it's usually nothing more than the ass covering department. It could be one of the best roles ever. Let's create the greatest culture and attract the best people, making this such a fun, rewarding, challenging place to be, with loads of development opportunities, support, coaching, and all the trimmings. Let's recognize that a company is really its people. So let's create fertile soil for them to grow and feel fulfilled, and therefore be the greatest evangelist for the company, because it's legitimately awesome. No, F you, we're here for the sole purpose of making sure you don't sue the company, and that's when we want you to leave. We've got enough data and leverage to make sure you go without a fuss. Bunch of bastards. They could have made it beautiful, but no, they made it out of crap and gravel and corn.
There you go.
Yeah. So anyways, that's why we're having this podcast. Thank you for joining us. And remember, do talk to HR.